become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure.
What are you really afraid of? Hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat?
The moral to be drawn from this nightmare situation is a simple one.
You simply have to turn your back on a culture that has gone sterile and dead and get with the program of a living world and a re-empowerment of the imagination.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Fundamental changes in society are sometimes labeled impractical.
Our birth, our death, our being in the moment, these are mysteries. They are doorways opening on to unimaginable vistas of self-exploration.
The contemplation of death and the acceptance of death is very highly generative of creative life.
Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts.
The society is trying to cure itself by an archaic revival.
What account would we give of our stewardship of the planet Earth?
The world is not an unsolved problem for scientists or sociologists. The world is a living mystery.
I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel.
Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
Yeah, that sounds like a question that you know what I'm going to say. Is there a myth that underlies modern culture? Yes. And it's not what we think of as a myth, usually. Like when people think of the word myth, they're talking about, some kind of stories about the gods and the heroes and something that you don't really on some level believe is real. But a real myth is something that feels more real in some important way than just a story, or even than factual accounts of things. So yeah, we definitely have a set of myths that define the modern world, and they answer the basic questions that human beings ask, like who am I? Why am I here? What is a human being? Why are we on Earth? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Those are all mythical questions. And just like any other culture that's ever lived, we have a set of answers to those questions. Who we are is a separate self, a soul encased in flesh, or a mind inside a body, or a genetically programmed machine, or an economic actor, or a Cartesian speck of consciousness, like many, many different versions of this separate self. And another aspect of the myth is a theory of change, a causal principle. Here's how change happens in the world. A force is exerted on a mass and something moves. And all of the change that we see in the world is the sum total of myriad forces acting on myriad masses. That's another part of the myth. Another part is that reality is something objective outside of ourselves. Another part of the myth is that everything can in principle be measured. That's a key to the myth that we call science. Another part of the myth is that humanity has risen from desperate origins, where we were struggling to survive, mired in superstition and ignorance, but thanks to our big brains and nimble hands, we developed science and technology and rose above nature to become its lords and masters, overcoming one frontier after another, and someday destined to leave Earth entirely and ascend to outer space, or ascend to digital consciousness, or leave the body behind. This was another part of the myth. So all these things come together to scaffold modern civilization as we know it. And as you probably are aware, and everybody, I think, has some dim awareness of this at least, the myth is failing us. We're not it hasn't brought the promised utopia that it was supposed to. And so we're in a crisis right now, a crisis of meaning and a crisis of identity on a collective level, and also for many of us on a personal level, because the meaning of life on a personal level draws from the collective myth. It tells you how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to live a life, what's important. And that instruction set is no longer very satisfying. And even if you try to follow it, it doesn't work. So yeah, that's a way to describe our crisis. Yeah, so one of the patterns of the modern myth is to solve problems by finding one cause which is quantifiable, and then, or one enemy, and attacking that one thing. Like that way of thinking, find a number and shape all of your choices to maximize or minimize that number. Like we got that from financial thinking. How do you maximize profit? How do you maximize rational self-interest? And so it's not that big a step to transpose that onto carbon metrics. Here's another number, and if we only can minimize this number, then the world will be saved, and we'll all live happily ever after. I mean, that's kind of the same as the money fantasy. If I only had enough money, I'd live happily ever after. So the problem, of course, whether you're speaking of money or of carbon, the problem are all the things that are left out of that number. In the case of money, like the things that actually make life rich. You can have all, my son Carrie and I just read the story of King Midas, who's had the magic touch and turned everything to gold that he touched. And of course, you know the story, he can't eat food because the food turns to gold. The flowers turn to gold. They don't smell nice anymore. His daughter turns to gold. So that's kind of a metaphor for what happens when we convert all of life to money. We miss relationship, beauty, nourishment, and so what gets left out when we talk about carbon, and the equation that you mentioned of green equals low carbon. Like if an airline says we're moving towards sustainability by 2030 or whatever, what does that actually mean? What are they saying? They're saying that they're going to have net zero carbon, which means that they're going to offset their jet fuel by planting a forest somewhere. Okay, so what gets left out? Well, on one level, the mechanics of what happens to create that forest offset, that gets left out. Maybe a forest is cut down and then replanted, but the one who cut it down, that happened before the airline bought it to plant their trees. So like that kind of thing goes on in the background. But also there's the question of what kind of forest is planted. Is it a tree farm, like a commercial tree farm? Or is it a ecological, biodiverse forest that, with a virgin forest? I mean, you can't just plant a virgin forest. So that's left out. But also, like in that whole way of thinking, what gets left out is what, in my opinion, is actually destroying the biosphere, which is not so simple as higher levels of greenhouse gases. That makes sense if you think that Earth is like this big machine, and the air-fuel mixture is off, and it's going to cause the machine to fail. It's going to cause the machine to overheat. We better tamper with that. We better, tweak that number so that it runs more smoothly. If the world were that simple, then yeah. But actually, Earth is not a machine. Earth is alive. Earth is a being. Earth has organs, tissues, cells. Earth has a physiology. When we disrupt the physiology, when we kill the organs, when we reduce levels of whales to like 5 or 10% or less of what they were, when the fish biomass of the ocean drops by whatever, 50, 70% when the seagrass meadows are all but destroyed in New England, when the mangrove swamps are at 50% of their previous levels, when 70 or 80% of insects are gone, when amphibians are dying everywhere, when forests are being cut down and replaced with biofuels plantations, when soil is being stripped away, when all this is happening, then these are the organs of Gaia. And you could cut carbon emissions to zero overnight, but if you continue doing that, Earth will die of organ failure. That's how I see the crisis. And that is like a lot harder to solve in a way than to maybe install a bunch of carbon sucking machines, or to transition to biofuels or something. I mean, ultimately that's probably impossible too, but at least like it's a familiar problem. Let's get those numbers down. The transformation in humanity and in our mythology that's required to treat Earth as a being, as a sacred living being, that's a much bigger shift. And that requires a wholesale transformation of our entire economy, of our entire civilization, of our psychology also. Once you accept and start seeing Earth as a being, then there's a million opportunities to act on that knowledge, to take care of even one place, one garden, one tree, and to set an example and generate a morphic field of holding Earth sacred. Yeah, I don't think the environmental movement has lost the love. It's still there, but there's this idea that if we want to convince the general public and the corporations and the governments, we can't just rely on love. We have to invoke self-interest because that's all they care about. We have to demonstrate how, the future of humanity is at stake. Their money is at stake. Their children's welfare is at stake. Like bad things are going to happen to us. So there's this idea that we have to scare people into what? Into loving the earth? Well, no, scare them into at least pretending that they care, or doing things that will preserve life. And I think that this is such a big mistake. For one thing, if you're appealing to fear and self-interest, then what's really in your self-interest is for everybody else to make changes, but not you. That's, other governments can do it, other cities can do it, other companies can do it, but not us. Secondly, I like to say that the story we hold about somebody is an invitation for them to be it. So if you're going out there, like say that you're a corporate executive, and I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I know you. You're greedy. You don't care about life. Like I'm not inviting you into love. I'm actually patronizing you and in a way insulting you, at least energetically. I mean, maybe I'm not saying those words, but I'm going to be radiating sanctimoniousness, self-righteousness, if I'm approaching people with that attitude. I'm going to be talking down at people. And no wonder there's so much resentment toward environmentalists, like as if they think they're better than everybody else. Well, guess what? Sometimes maybe they do think that they're better than everybody else. So we got to let go of that and stand in the place of when I look at that executive or whoever I'm talking to, I'm like, I know you. You are life. And you are here for the same reason all life is here, which is to participate in the unfolding beauty and aliveness of this planet. That is a different mythology. When we stand in that, we become invitations into that. So, and if you look at I like to ask people, what made you into an environmentalist? Was that you got scared into it? Or is it that you had an experience of beauty and loss, maybe, that in which you fell in love? The beauty made you fall in love. The loss made you realize how precious the beloved was. And you know, like for me, even if global warming isn't a thing, like even if temperatures start dropping, am I going to say, oh, great, let's continue devastating the ecosphere. Let's continue destroying rivers with oil spills. Let's continue strip mining no, I don't care. Because I love these things. I don't want to see, seabirds soaked in oil washing up on the shore. I don't want to see like plastic all over the oceans, whales choked on plastic. I love this earth, and so do you. Like, let's get honest here. We love Earth. Now, I may be speaking to somebody who for whom that love is blocked, like they're not in touch with that love. And then maybe the question becomes, how do we connect each other? And sometimes I'm out of touch with it too. Like I get caught up in my thing, and maybe sometimes I need a reminder as well. So what if environmentalism was an endeavor to constantly call each other back into our true nature, which is love of life? Yeah. So the story of separation is what I call the guiding mythology of civilization. And, it's tempting to try to pin it on like some watershed moment, some bad choice that some group of humans made, and then they expanded and they conquered everybody else, and colonized everybody and so forth, to again, find a locus of evil, something to blame. So some people might blame industry, some take it farther back to agriculture. Certain radicals would take it even farther back to naming, to language itself, maybe even to fire. Like that was the first dominator technology. No other animal uses fire. It separated the world into the wild and the domestic. It made us lords of a part of the world and launched technology and so forth. Like maybe we shouldn't do that, right? Fire, bad. Tools, bad. I jokingly took it back to, eukaryotic cells, bad, because we're keeping all the DNA for ourselves and not promiscuously sharing it like prokaryotes do. So I was like, okay, that can't be right, And this whole idea of that we're nature's big mistake, that we're like this bad thing, and that therefore what? Therefore we have to somehow conquer ourselves. That's the same mentality of conquest and the same distrust of nature. So yeah, I don't like, so the story of separation, it grew, it evolved over time. It co-evolved with technology and with various social developments. Like you need some level of a perception of separation in order to use money to mediate transactions. And you step out of a gift economy. But once you step into a money economy, that creates even more separation. Like technology builds on itself. You have some rudimentary technology, you have a rudimentary division of labor that creates a social surplus, an agricultural surplus that allows a further specialization, more technology, more division of labor. So then you get social classes, then you get debt, you get slavery, you get warfare, you get all the stuff. Like every civilization that we know of had these phenomena to some degree, whether it originated, and they originated independently. China, India, the Middle East, right? North America, South America. I mean, civilization arose independently in a bunch of places, and you started to see the same things. So that means, for me, that the last 10,000 years, the last 1,000, the last 100 years, the current age was inevitable. If it was inevitable, then maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe it's part of a larger process. And what would be the culmination of that process and the next step from the age of separation? That's the question I like to ask. For me, it's having trust in an intelligence beyond myself that assigns me my role. And that communicates to me what my role is through my body, through my love, through my care, through the things that get under my skin. And I don't have to have the plan. I don't have to understand it. All I have to do is trust my intuition that there is a plan or a process or an intelligence at work in the world. To trust that requires resisting the programming of the mythology that we grew up in. That says that there is no intelligence in the world outside of human intelligence. And in fact, that the magnificent destiny of human beings is to stamp the world with our intelligence, because it's just chaos out there. It's just random forces indifferent to human well-being, just, protons, neutrons, and electrons bouncing around randomly, right? And we can bring order to chaos. As Darth Vader said, we can bring order to the galaxy. Like this mentality of conquest, of domination, that depends on thinking that we're the only intelligence. I'm grateful to have had experiences and help to see past the blinders that were conferred on me by my education and by my upbringing in this society of separation. And I think that awareness becomes more and more available as the society breaks down and we can see beyond it. To some extent, but I always carried a mute protest. I didn't know what I was protesting against, what I was rebelling against. I just couldn't make myself go along with the program. I'm like, this can't be right. I can't. We're not supposed to be sitting in this classroom filling out these worksheets when it's a nice day outside, and the passenger pigeons, they're not supposed to be extinct, and like all the ailments of the world that I became aware of as a teenager, I did not accept them as just the way things are. I thought, like, this can't be right. What's wrong here? And I couldn't make myself participate. The bribes offered for my full-hearted participation just didn't do it for me. And it wasn't that I had like a cogent intellectual refutation of civilization at that time. Few of us did. What we had was just a innate resistance to it that might take the form of procrastination, laziness, getting drunk, self-sabotage, vandalism, depression, anxiety. Like you can't make yourself go along with it. So that was my state as well. And then eventually in my late teens, early 20s, I began to encounter glimpses of light coming in through the cracks of the shell of normality that had encased me. Through, I lived in Taiwan starting at age 19, and then, through most of my 20s, and experienced, like, especially in those days, there was still a very different worldview that was alive in that place, from another society, an agrarian, more animistic society. And I encountered, psychedelics that also confirmed my suspicion that reality, as it had been narrated to me, was not all that there was. So yeah, these medicines are coming in when they're needed, called by our need and called by our readiness for them. Because I don't think that we would ever be able to escape our condition on our own. Fortunately, the universe is generous, and the story of separation isn't true. Because it isn't true, There are other powers that are beyond our comprehension, that are ready and waiting. All they need to be is I don't know if they even need to be asked, but they respond to our readiness. They respond to the ripening of the human condition within the circumstances of civilization. Yeah. Yeah. The cry for help can take many forms. It's not necessarily like directly asking, please help me, but it's for me sometimes it comes at the moment where I give up all hope of receiving help. At the moment of desperation, of despondency, where like, I just don't know what to do. It's hopeless. That is a kind of surrender. It's a kind of humility where I don't got this anymore. I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my resource. That's often what it takes for me to actually receive help. Otherwise, I can say I want help, but it's actually part of my existing agenda. Yeah, I think that the story of separation was, in a way, a liberating thing at one point. It's like, I'm free, I'm independent, I can do anything I want. There's no limit. Like, that's a space that we explored as a society. And now that has become stifling, dispiriting. It's like, yeah, it's like you're free to go anywhere you want, yet no matter where you go, you're still encased in the same dome. You can't get out. We can't achieve the paradise that we thought we could achieve through technologies based on force and based on control. And not only are we getting no closer to paradise on Earth, we're actually getting farther away now. That wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, this is 2021 right now. That was an impossibly futuristic year when I was a kid. I mean, I'm dating myself here. Like I was growing up in the 70s, the future was going to be awesome. I mean, by the year 1990, we were going to have space colonies, robots were going to be doing all the work, it was going to be incredible. And here we are in 2021, and life is not getting more and more awesome. It's kind of stagnated. In fact, it's kind of like it's more degraded. So yeah, so now what's liberating from the confines of this bubble of control, this bubble of where we are worshiping not life anymore, but worshiping safety. That's the God of our culture right now, which is kind of a substitute for any actual ambition, any aspiration. If there's nothing that you really want, then you might as well stay safe. Might as well stay indoors. Might as well stay in your bubble. The obsession with safety in all of its forms, from the national security state to biosecurity, biofascism, like all this stuff, it's a symptom that the part of the mythology that tells us why we are here has broken down. How much excitement is there about the mission to Mars? Woohoo! When I was a kid, we were obsessed with space travel. Obsessed. I had a shampoo bottle that was in the shape of a rocket. And when you finish the shampoo, then like you could squeeze it and the cap would shoot off. We were so into that stuff. Because it was I mean, we were still in the full flush of this technological triumphalistic trajectory. You know, we were gonna conquer. It was, and so we don't have that anymore. That's why there's such a crisis of meaning, and that's one reason why for the obsession with safety, which is really also coming from a denial of death. Only if you deny death, if you think that you could be immortal, is the most important thing to be safe. Otherwise, I mean, you realize the purpose of life could not be to survive it. The purpose of life is to live it, not to make sure that you don't die, because you're going to die. Yeah. So it gets very morally complex if your morality is based on minimizing death. Why would you put death avoidance at the top of your value system? Only if you are in the mythology of the separate self that sees death as total annihilation, the total extinguishing of like a candle flame being snuffed out, right? Death is the ultimate catastrophe for the ego. If you understand yourself as not just a separate self, if you understand yourself as a nexus of relationship that co-evolves with all of these relationships, with all these other selves over time, and that has a beingness not dependent on just this body, then death takes on a very different meaning. Most cultures did not and do not believe the modern myth of the self. And if you start looking, you can find plenty of reason to think that some kind of subjective existence persists after death. So if you, though, accept death as the ultimate catastrophe, total annihilation, then you can build a moral system based on minimizing death. Yeah, and then it becomes very morally complex, because no matter what you do, you're going to cause death. And then you start to say, well, some deaths are maybe more important than others, because some life is more important than others, and this animal has a central nervous system, and that one doesn't, and that one's just a plant, and those are just rocks. Who cares, you know? And so it is definitely a step forward to say, no, they're all valuable, even rocks. But as long as you're basing your moral system on death avoidance as a number one priority, which it sure seems to be in this society. I mean, look at our medical system. You know, like half of healthcare expenditures are in the last 6 months of life. So, you know, death, like that's like the ultimate negative outcome in modern medicine. Yeah, so letting go of the separate self, understanding ourselves as more than that. Avoiding death is no longer the top priority. And the top priority becomes living well, living right. So to extend that to for oneself, right? It's like, I know I'm going to die, so I want to live really well. I want to fully live this life, even if it might be sometimes a little more risky to go out of my house or to hug somebody, God forbid. But I want to be fully alive. Okay, how do you expand that to the society level? How do you apply that to agriculture? Well, you think, okay, my goal is not to avoid all possible death, minimize all possible death, maybe only eat fruit because that falls naturally from the tree and doesn't kill anything. But what about the cells in that fruit? You know, how do they feel about it? I haven't asked them. Like, it gets morally complicated. But instead you say, okay, how do I live and eat so that a cow can live a good life for a cow? So a chicken can live a good life for a chicken. So a corn can live the good life of a corn. Like, what does that look like? Even to ask that question opens up new perspectives, right? So eating meat, like most of the meat that we eat is baby animals, not the adults who have lived a good life, right? And so you think, well, that's horrible. We shouldn't be eating baby animals. If we do eat meat, it should be ones that have already enjoyed the full life of a cow, full life of a rabbit. But guess what? In nature, most baby animals get eaten. So if you're gonna have a system where all the babies get to grow up and live full lives, which means to reproduce themselves, I mean, that's an awful lot of rabbits. A mother rabbit can give birth to 100 baby rabbits, 50 or 100 baby rabbits in her lifetime. Only 2 of them in nature grow up to reproductive adulthood. If you're talking about tadpoles, it's even fewer. Like octopuses, very, very, they spawn a lot of little octopuses, and only 1 or 2 of them is going to, so like that, we have to accept that that's part of nature. There's a kind of a hypocrisy, like an inner contradiction that if you are yourself living if you yourself are worshiping at the altar of risk minimization and safety and holding yourself as the most important thing, your separate self as the most important thing, but you're not treating others that way, there's a hypocrisy there. There's an inner tension there. And I think that a lot of animal rights activists are calling that out. To be consistent, if you eat animals and plants, then you yourself have to hold something for yourself more important than yourself to be consistent. What is that thing that's more important than your own safety, than your own security, than your own comfort? What is that thing that's more important? Well, it's why you're here. It's that which you would lay your life down for, that which you would dedicate your life energy to. It's your sacrament. In many Aboriginal traditions, it was understood that all beings are like that. All beings are living as part of a larger process or a greater good. That the wolf, like the deer, gives itself in some level to the wolf. That part of the reason that the deer is here is to feed the wolf. That the reason that the earthworm is here is to make new soil. It's not like other cultures did not and do not see nature as a headlong competition to see who can survive and outcompete the rest. They see it as a circle of gifts. So all this moral complexity, it's a byproduct of a misunderstanding of who we are and why we're here. And when we think in terms of how do I serve life and beauty on earth, then for me, like a lot of the mist clears. It's not that I won't say it becomes simple, but there's like a guiding principle. Yeah, we can't ignore competition in nature, but it's not the driving force of evolution. That's a misperception. Evolution happens through symbiosis, through the merging of organisms into greater wholes, through the sharing of DNA across organismic and species boundaries, through the assimilation of simpler organisms into complex ones, through coevolution. That's how life evolves. Competition is within that maybe a refining principle, like who serves this particular need of the environment most effectively. Competition in the human world is kind of like that too, like in its positive expression, like maybe there's a role that needs to be filled and you and I compete to fill that role because that role needs to be fulfilled in the best possible way. So that's how I see it. Yeah, so I'm familiar with Daniel Quinn's interpretation of the Genesis story. The expulsion from the garden, expulsion from the hunter-gatherer existence into a world of scratching in the dirt, of toil, that originates in the concepts of good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the organization of the world into categories of self and other, some of which are to be protected and others of which are to be dominated, like that whole thing. There is truth in that. But there's still the question of why did so many societies choose this? And like, it's actually a mistake, as I said before, it's a mistake to say that that is just an isolated watershed moment, a choice. It wasn't like, there's a bunch of hunter-gatherers and all of a sudden one of them gets the bright idea to plant crops or to herd animals. It evolved over a long span of time. Maybe, first they're just following the herds, and over time they come to start protect the herds. First they're just going to where the grain is plentiful at a certain time of year, and over time they start to take care of that grain, and eventually they become farmers over 20 generations. So yeah, this there's a mythological truth to the expulsion from the garden story. But I don't think that it's an accurate historical narrative. Yeah, I mean, it seems that science was a revolution away from a theistic worldview, away from a religious worldview. But in many ways, it's an extension of it. It's taking it to its final extreme, because the God of the monotheistic religions is already separate from nature. It's already it's already a late stage in a long, long process of the abstraction of sacredness from materiality. The idea that spirit is separate from matter, that the sacred is just in the church or just in the Bible, and that everything else is profane or mundane, like this division of the world into the spiritual and the material, the sacred and the non-sacred, the soul and the flesh. Okay, this was a long process. I mean, even going back to ancient Greek times, in very ancient Greek times, the gods were like, they weren't separate from the things that they were the gods of. It wasn't like Poseidon was like some guy who lived in the ocean. Poseidon was the ocean. And over time, the gods became separate from the things that they ruled, but they still lived on Mount Olympus, like that Mount Olympus right there. The gods are up there, guys. And then, someone climbed Mount Olympus, hey, no gods. Oh, well, there's actually like a bigger Mount Olympus in the sky. It's a figure of speech, like the gods moved away from materiality. And so the monotheistic religions, although not in their esoteric interpretations, but in their institutional, like public interpretations, they take God out of materiality altogether and make creation into a one-time act. Just like the Big Bang. Like there's some source in science, there's like a singular source of all of the negative entropy in the universe. And then the universe just kind of winds down from there. In the same way, the creator God creates everything and sets it in motion. But that understanding of Christianity is actually pretty recent. In the Middle Ages, God was an active participant all the time. Like, why is the wind blowing? God is making it blow. What animates the animals? That's God's spirit. Like, God is in everything all the time. But when science arose, it continued the removal of God from matter. And science basically agrees with religion. It says, yup, there's this totally mundane, causal, like force-based causal world, Like religion says there's that, and then there's this other world. And science says, yep, there's that, but there isn't another world. It's just that. It's like science continues the removal of God to the point of totality. So I don't think that science is a fundamental departure from a trend that started with animism, in which God, spirit, sacredness was in all things, and then eventually, banished those qualities to another realm. The final stage of that is to eliminate it entirely. I'm just kind of using it loosely to refer to the view that there is life, aliveness in all things. Not only animals and plants, but rocks, the wind, the clouds, the sun, the moon, stories. Like those are even alive. Everything is alive. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. The space between stories, the pregnant emptiness. Yeah, it has phases of great discomfort, especially as you're entering into it. But it also, it can be such a beautiful time of rest, a time of letting go, like a time of serenity, where you just trust whatever's coming next. Just trust, because I've given up, and given up the burden of knowing how to do it, and the burden of who I think I am, these concepts of myself, these plans and desires and expectations. I'm giving all that up. All the stories, all the roles. Like it's a deep out-breath, actually. And it's not, I think eventually in that space, one starts to want to make new stories, to enter into new dramas. Human beings love drama. Drama is how we create the world. And if we don't have any, we make some. If things are a little too easy, we make a drama. So it's a time of, especially our culture is very, very uncomfortable with uncertainty. And if there's one defining feature of the space between stories, it is uncertainty. We are entering it culturally right now. On the personal level, it's like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what's real even. I don't know how to do this. And on the cultural level, that's happening. In the West, especially. Not so much in China. They have a very strong sense of who they are and why they're here right now. Like the story, their phase of civilization right now is they're very strong in their story of self on the collective level. And therefore, the people there, many of them also have a strong sense of purpose. They know why they're here. To participate in, the rise of China. But in the West, no. We're in a pretty advanced stage of the breakdown. Part of the breakdown is to try to cling all the more tightly to it, to double down on what wasn't working, or to try to manufacture some substitute purpose. Try to gin up a new existential threat. Vladimir Putin, But compared to the big scary Soviet Union, it's just not really working as a way to define ourselves. Part of our definition was in contrast to the Iron Curtain, the Soviet bloc, the Gulag, communism, the hammer and sickle, the big red menace. We knew who we were then. So this is just one aspect of our breakdown. On a deeper level, it's the breakdown of the enemy. That whole organizing principle of good versus evil, us versus them, in which the goal is simply victory, the final victory over evil. Impossible. Ever since 1951, final victory over the enemy was made impossible when the Soviet Union got nuclear weapons. And then there's no such thing. Yeah, because we don't have any other story right now. So of course we turn on each other. We don't have a unifying narrative, like something that brings all society together, that we agree, here's what's important, and I'm willing to sacrifice for this thing. And we're in it together because we all care about it. Like we kind of had that 50 years ago. Not all of society, but the vast majority of society had kind of agreed on what America was, for example. And there's nothing like that right now. So yeah, we're because we don't have a unifying story, and we don't have yet an alternative to the us versus them story. We turn on each other. We erect enemies everywhere, and it kind of gives life meaning. You know, you go online and you get all outraged about something, and those horrible people, and how come they don't get it? You know, and like you feel like a little surge of purpose. Like the world kind of makes sense a little bit. Here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. So it's really a desperation to find some meaning in a world in which meaning is breaking down, where all of the old, or many of the old certainties are in disarray. And the progress toward utopia, the next invention, you know, what do they think of next? The next miracle drug. When was the last miracle drug? Like 1973 or something? I mean, when was the last major disease that was extinguished? No. Instead, we have new diseases, like new chronic conditions. It's very uncomfortable, this breakdown. Much easier to find an enemy, find someone to blame for the dysfunction, you know, for the illness, the social illness, the physical illness. Our society has no idea what to do with the true pandemics of our time. Autoimmunity, allergies, depression, addiction. No idea what to do about those. Not to mention a toxic environment, which contributes to all of those. What we do know what to do about is a pathogen. So, you know, we've seen the world turned upside down in response to COVID. Even though the actual level of suffering caused by COVID is negligible compared to the amount that's caused by chronic disease. But we don't know what to do about that compared to the amount caused by addiction, by depression. But we don't know what to do about that. It doesn't fit the template of a bad guy, of a one thing that's the source of all our problems. You know, it's the same mindset as money and as carbon. You find the one thing, the one key that'll solve everything. And when we're faced with a problem that does not easily fit into that template, we kind of like just either pretend it doesn't exist, or we just like learn to live with it, or we look for something else to obsess over as a proxy for all the things that we can't do anything about. It's almost welcome to find something that finally you can worry about it and do something about it. Like life is really uncertain and dangerous and scary. And what am I going to do about it? Like maybe I'm subject to an addiction and I can't stop it. Maybe I just feel depressed. I don't want to live life. Maybe my teenager or my son or someone I know is addicted to drugs, or someone committed suicide, or like, I mean, there's so many things. Like I hurt all the time. I don't know what to do. And now we have a pandemic where we know what to do. You stay indoors. You stay away. It's under control. In a way, global warming is the same. We have a biosphere, a planet that is increasingly deranged in its functioning. It's sick. The planet is sick. And the cause of it is everything about our way of life. And we don't know what to do about everything. But let's displace all of that anxiety and all of that care, all of that love, all of that desire to do something about it onto something that we do know what to do about, at least theoretically. It's really compelling to make that diversion, to displace it onto the promise of here is sustainability. Here's the magic solution, the one thing that'll solve all your problems. Same pattern in many, many areas. I mean, that's the thing when you have a reductionistic understanding of the problem, like I was saying before, like everything that gets left out of that reductionistic number is ignored. So like I call it plastic culture. Have you ever been like driven down the Central Valley of California? You see fields as far as the eye can see covered with plastic for weed control. I suppose I don't know if it's better than pesticides or not. I mean, but like a lot of organic agriculture is done that way as well. Like just a sea of plastic. And then so like the solutions are sometimes worse than the problem. The solution that comes from a reductionistic understanding, the things that get left out, they come back to haunt you. So you're mentioning solar panels, wind turbines, you start to look into like the manufacturing process, and where the lithium comes from and the cobalt, and the silver and the rare earths, and it's horrifying. Or if you look at the mega dams and biofuels plantations that are generating so-called carbon neutral electricity, it's the cure is worse than the disease. And that's inevitable. The cure is always going to be worse than the disease when we are blind to the truth that Earth is alive, that we live in a complex system that includes ourselves. It could happen. There's no guarantee that humanity will survive. The question is, what is bottom? Like, what is rock bottom? It's different for different people. One person might stop drinking when his wife leaves him, and that's rock bottom for him. Another person might not stop until he's on his deathbed. So the question for me is, how do you raise bottom? That depends where I am. I would like it probably, to be buried in a pine box under a tree or something, that I can feed the tree. But, if it needs to be devoured by birds, that'd be all right too. Just to return back to nature. Thanks for asking.